In this video, we're going to have a look at calculating the probability of two dependent events. So to calculate the probability of two dependent events, it's the same as calculating the probability of independent events. So the probability of A and B is equal to the probability of A times the probability of B. What's important to remember though, that when we are calculating dependent events, the probability of event B occurring is going to be dependent on what is happening in event A. So let's have a look at the steps of calculating the probability of dependent events. So the first step is to calculate the probability of event A. The second step is to calculate the probability of event B, remembering that it is going to be dependent on what is happening in event A. And the third step is to calculate the probability of event A and event B occurring by multiplying the two independent probabilities together. So let's have a look at some examples of how do we calculate the probability of dependent events. So in the example, we have a packet of beads that contains 3 red beads, 4 blue beads, and 8 green beads. If 2 beads are taken without replacement, find the probability of the listed events from happening. Now what's important to note that in the question it says without replacement. This is what makes these dependent events, because the probability of event B, being my second selection of bead, is going to be dependent on the selection I've made in my first event. So let's have a look at these probability calculations. So the first one is the probability of getting 2 red beads. So my first step is to calculate the probability of getting a red bead on my first draw. And I do that by working out the favourable outcomes divided by the total number of outcomes. So my favourable outcome is going to be getting a red bead, so that's going to be 3, and my total outcomes is going to equal 15. And that can be simplified to 1/5. So the probability of getting a red on my first draw is going to be equal to 1/5. So my next step is to calculate the probability of getting a red bead on my second draw. And again, that's going to be favourable outcomes divided by total outcomes. This time my favourable outcomes is going to be 2. It's going to be 2 because originally I had 3 beads, but I've already drawn 1 red bead out, so that leaves me with 2 red beads left in the bag to choose from. So there's going to be 2 over 14, which can be simplified to 1/7, which again, on my second draw, I've only got 14 beads left in the bag, so my total outcomes is going to be 14. So the probability of getting a red on my first draw is 1/5. The probability of getting a red on my second draw is 1/7. So my last step is to calculate the probability of getting 2 red beads. And I calculate the probability by multiplying the probability of getting a red on my first draw by the probability of getting a red on my second draw. So that is going to be probability of getting a red on my first draw is 1/5, multiplied by the probability of getting a red on my second draw, 1/7. So that is going to equal 1/35. So the probability of getting 2 red beads is 1/35. In part B, I want to find the probability of getting 2 blue beads. So my first step is to calculate the probability of getting a blue on my first draw. And I do that by working out my total favourable outcomes divided by my total number of outcomes, which is going to equal 4. So I've got 4 blue beads divided by my total number of beads of 15. So the probability of getting a blue bead on my first draw is 4/15. The second step is to work out the probability of getting a blue on my second draw. I work out this probability the same way, total number of favourable outcomes divided by total number of outcomes. But this time I need to remember that I've already have 1 blue bead withdrawn from the bag from my first withdrawal. So this time I've only got 3 blue beads left. So the probability of getting a blue bead on my second draw is going to be 3 over my total number of beads left, which is 14. So now that I've got my two individual probability calculations, I can calculate the probability of getting two blue beads by multiplying them together. So that is going to equal the probability of a blue on my first draw is 4/15 times the probability of a blue on my second draw is 3/14. Now, multiplying the two fractions together, that is going to equal 12/210, which can simplify to 4/70. So the probability of getting two blue beads is going to be 4/70. In part C of the example, I want to calculate the probability of getting a red and a blue bead. Now the steps are going to be the same. The first step is to calculate the probability of getting a red on my first draw, and that is going to equal 3/15. So I got 3 red beads over a total of 15 beads. The second step is to calculate the probability of getting a blue on my second draw. And that probability is going to be total number of favourable outcomes divided by total number of possible outcomes. So left in the bag, I'm going to have 4 blue beads. So there's going to be 4 over my total number of beads left, which is 14. Now before I go ahead and calculate my probability of getting a red and a blue, both of my probabilities can be simplified. So the probability of getting a red can be simplified to 1/5, and the probability of getting a blue can be simplified to 2/7. So now that I've got both of my probabilities in simplified form, I can calculate the probability of getting a red and a blue bead. And that is calculated by the probability of getting a red on my first draw, multiplied by the probability of getting a blue on my second draw. So the probability of getting a red is 1/5, multiply the probability of getting a blue, which is 2/7. When I multiply those two fractions together, I'm going to get 2/35. So the probability of getting a red and a blue bead on my two draws is 2/35. In part D, I want to calculate the probability of getting a blue and a green. So my first step is going to be to calculate the probability of getting a blue bead on my first draw. And then it's going to be the total number of favourable outcomes, which is equal to 4, over my total number of outcomes, which is 15. So the probability of getting a blue on my first draw is 4/15. The second step is going to be to calculate the probability of getting a green on my second draw. And then it's going to be total number of favourable outcomes, which is 8. So I've got 8 green beads divided by the total number of outcomes, which is going to be 14, because I've got 14 beads left after I've taken out my first bead, and that is going to simplify to 4/7. Now that I've calculated my probability of the independent events happening, to find the probability of getting a blue and a green, I need to multiply the two events together. So multiplying the two events, the probability of getting a blue on my first draw is 4/15, multiplied by the probability of getting a green on my second draw is 4/7. So multiplying the two fractions together, that is going to equal 16/105. So the probability of getting a blue and a green is going to be 16/105. So that's some examples of how do we calculate dependent probability.